Freddy Versus Jason is one of the dumbest and most early 2000 movies you'll ever see. And I kinda love it. Alright, look, so it's no secret that Freddy vs. Jason is no masterpiece. But what did you expect from a film that by its very concept is nothing but fanservice? Any film that was about Freddy Krueger from the Nightmare on Elm Street series having a scrap with Jason Voorhees from the Friday the 13th franchise wasn't ever going to be some profound experience. But it didn't need to be. All it had to do was put two iconic movie monsters in the same frame and then spend millions of dollars making it look cool when they punch and stab each other. And on that note, it's a roaring success. The final act of this movie, if you're a fan of the sillier elements of both these franchises, is some of the most fun I have ever had with a horror movie. It's pure WWE nonsense. And quite frankly, while it isn't the best film it could be, it's some kind of miracle it even exists. There were people in Hollywood trying to get this film made in the 80s. We had our first official tease towards it in the post-credits of Jason Goes to Hell in 1993, and it still didn't get made till 2003. It seems Jason really did go to hell. Development hell, that is! Shut up, that was good. See, for whatever reason, they just could not get this film made. At first it was rights battles, Paramount had Jason, New Line had Freddy, and they just couldn't work out a deal that both parties were happy with to even get so much as the pre-production ball rolling. But then, even when New Line got the character rights from Paramount after Jason Takes Manhattan underperformed, it still took another 14 years from that film's release. When it wasn't the rights issues, it was the story. The studio cycled through a whole bunch of different pitches and writers, and it just took them forever to get something down as a baseline that didn't swiftly get thrown out. You would think that Freddy vs. Jason would be pretty difficult to mess up. Like, surely a script for this film just calls for creating any excuse for these two to fight, and then the rest is just action and effects. Seeing the final result of what we got as well, you'd be forgiven to think they phoned it in and just went with the very first concept that came across their desks in an effort to just get this obvious cash cow out and making money. What with its multiple plot holes, unlikable main cast, and massive exposition dumps. But no! You would not believe some of the stuff they turned down to get this. Some of it sounds awful. Some of it sounds really fun, but almost all of it sounds batshit insane. Just to briefly touch on a few. Writer Louis Abernathy was one of the first hired to draft an idea, and he suggested that Freddy had been a camp counselor who drowned Jason, and that would give the characters their reason to cross paths, as Jason would be out looking for revenge. Also in his draft, there was a major side antagonistic force in the form of a dedicated Freddy cult, which later another writer would expand upon and name the Fredheads. And the final fight in this version was going to be in a boxing ring in hell with Ted Bundy as the announcer, Adolf Hitler and Mussolini in the front row of the audience, and Freddy bringing a foreign object to the proceedings by pulling an axe out of cocktail waitress Bloody Mary's head. Tasteless and stupid? Maybe. Would I have watched this about 100 times? Almost definitely. Ethan Raife and Cyrus Forrest took this draft and expanded upon the Freddy as camp counselor idea by having it be revealed that Freddy molested Jason as a kid and then drowned him on purpose so he wouldn't tell. Big no thanks on that one. That's not what I want from a fun monster mashup romp. Peter Briggs had a draft that opened in the 17th century, would jump forward to 1999, then end in the 60s with Freddy's mother Amanda raising a young cowboy hat wearing Jason. Oh, and also at some point in this film, Freddy and Jason both murder the devil and the universe blips out of existence, but only for a little bit. And this turns out to be a good thing anyway, as it lets a cop travel back in time and right the signature signature that was missing on the search warrant that meant Freddy got off on a technicality. This is real. I swear down this was actually considered. Brandon Braga and Ronald D. Moore wrote a one where Freddy and Jason fuse into a two-headed Freddy-Jason monster, and the finale of that film sees the two heads battling for control of the body in a mall before Jason speaks for the first time and blows them both up. At one point, it was very sincerely considered that the film would have two different endings, one where Jason won and another where Freddy won, and audiences would get a different version depending on what theatre they ended up at. Seriously, production on this thing was wild. You know how many screenwriters wrote stuff for this movie? 17! 17 different people threw their hats into the ring for a total of 10 fully realised finished drafts. Obviously I can't cover them all, otherwise we'll never get to the actual movie, but if you want to go down an absolute rabbit hole and deep dive into this stuff, I've put some links in the description to a few of the screenplays I've mentioned, and also you can pick up this book, Slash of the Titans by Dustin McNeil, who covers not only why it took nearly 10 years and $4 million to find the right screenwriter, but also goes over every rejected idea there was. This thing is comprehensive. So if you haven't seen the movie, having now heard the absolute bonkers concepts that were passed up, you might be thinking, well, what did we actually end up with? And the answer, at least when compared to the rejected ideas, is probably the safest and most bland option. But it still hugely delivers where it counts. In the big silly fight. Opening on Freddy, he explains in monologue that the kids of Springwood have forgotten about him and that lack of fear has made him powerless. Somehow, Freddy is able to find Jason in hell, although he is notably this time not portrayed by Kane Hodder, but instead Canadian stuntman Ken Kersinger, for reasons that seemingly no one behind the scenes can really clarify as to why. Hodder even got the script and was in the running, but in the end he didn't get the part despite it seeming like a done deal that he'd be included. There's some speculation that the director Ronnie Yu wanted someone taller, but in the documentary Crystal Lake Memories, Ronnie states it was a studio decision at New Line and not his call, so who knows? Either way, it's a bad decision if you ask me. Regardless of the odd casting switch though, Jason is still the Jason we've always known, and Freddy is apparently somehow aware of Jason's relationship with his mother. He turns into Pamela Voorhees in one of Jason's dreams, though unfortunately he are not portrayed by Betsy Palmer. They asked, she just didn't want to do it, and orders him while in this disguise to kill kids in Elm Street. And I guess this resurrects Jason somehow, just like the pure desire to fill his mother's wishes makes him rise from the grave maybe? I mean, I'm assuming he's dead. Freddy does state he had to search the bowels of hell. Don't know how pretending to be the guy's mom gets him or Freddy out of that whole being in hell predicament, but I guess Jason just loves his mom that much, because the next thing you know, he's up, he's kicking, and he's off to Elm Street to start murdering our young teenage cast who suck so much. There was this trend in Friday movies as they went on to make the cast so unlikable you rooted for the killer. And this crossed over here with the early 2000s fad of making horror film teens these cynical, sardonic, edgy, chip on their shoulder carrying self-obsessed douchebags to create one of the most loathable casts of any film ever. With the exception of the film's final girl, her love interest and his mate, almost everyone in this film is insufferable. The only major female character besides our lead is depicted as massively vain and obsessed with getting a nose job and being mean to the uncool kid. But hey, it's Kelly Rowlands. That's at least weird and fun. And the dudes, oh, I mean, come on.
Babe, you make me ask you twice, okay?
You know about feng shui?
You tear me down to make yourself feel better because you really hate yourself, which is kind of pathetic when you actually stop and think about it, assuming, of course, you can think, with all that makeup weighing down your head.
Oh, thank God they all die. There's also a policeman and a stoner who is a carbon copy of Jay from Jay and Silent Bob, so much so that the Elm Street documentary Never Sleep Again even makes a joke about it.
I mean, it was amazing when they offered this and I went and I played Freebird and it was like a lifelong dream Wait, I didn't play Freebird. I wasn't in that movie.
But to be honest, these guys, despite being the main characters, aren't really all that important. They're more like a vehicle to get Freddy and Jason to fight. You see, the plan was Freddy sent Jason to Elm Street to kick up some fear, knowing that a lot of people will see his victims and think that Freddy did it. Which is exactly what happens immediately after this dickhead is thankfully folded in too. So satisfying. Turns out the reason people had forgotten about Freddy is that all the adults had everyone who'd had an encounter with him sectioned and drugged, and one of those people is final girl Laurie's boyfriend, and yeah, who cares? What makes Freddy and Jason fight? Well, once Jason goes on a big massacre, one that includes this fantastic cornfield rave slaughter for which he's on fire for almost all of it, and we get this awesome and probably pretty dangerous to shoot aerial shot, fear is rife in Elm Street once again, and Freddy is ready to slaughter. But one thing he didn't count on would be stopping Jason once he got started, and that hockey mask motherfucker keeps kill stealing. So the teens have to come up with a way to stop them, which leads to one of the most painful exposition dumps in the world.
Wait a minute. Freddy died by fire, Jason by water. How can we use that?
That's just a couple of seconds, but this shit's real bad, man. The scene of them sitting around goes on forever, and every single line is just an explainer. Anyway, their plan ends up being to get Jason to Crystal Lake, which they do by tranquilizing him and driving him there, and then pulling Freddy out of the dream world and having the two bad lads scrap and hopefully kill the shit out of each other in the camp. Now, fans have pointed out that to get from Crystal Lake to Elm Street, they'd need to cross the entire state of Pennsylvania to get there, whereas the film makes them seem like they're maybe an hour apart from one another. But whatever, I don't care. I don't know how long they've been driving, let's just say it took forever. Besides, Freddy's gonna fight Jason, nothing else matters. While en route, the scrap is already starting in the dream world as Freddy pinballs Jason around, but as the two fight, Jason starts to make a bit more of a comeback. And fun fact, wrestling legend Rey Mysterio, of all people, was actually the stunt double for Freddy in this scene. I guess that makes sense though, Freddy's always had a little bit of Mysterio flair in his performance, especially with that entrance jump he makes in Nightmare 2. Eventually it seems that Jason might be about to get the upper hand until a pipe bursts and Freddy discovers that Jason is afraid of water.
Oh, so you are afraid of something after all, huh?
Okay, I'm sorry. That is absolute bullshit. This dude willingly wades into water to kill people so much you'd think he was part fish. Jason has never in the 9 prior films even once been implied to be afraid of water. Even the screenwriters who ended up actually getting the job to make what ended up being the used script, Damien Shannon and Mark Swift, state they don't know where this came from. They said in Crystal Lake Memories they never wrote that Jason was afraid of water, they just wanted to imply that he has a subconscious fear of drowning. Now that I can believe, but whether something was changed when it came to filming or maybe it's just the direction, this certainly reads as Jason being afraid of water, and that's just absolute bollocks. I know these films don't exactly have the best track record on continuity, but come on. Nah. It matters very little though, to be fair to the film, because it only gets explored a little further briefly in the following scene during a Jason nightmare sequence where some kids bully him as a child in extremely choppy slow motion. There's a lot of this low frame rate slow-mo stuff in the film. It must be a stylistic choice because there's no way a film with this big budget couldn't afford higher FPS cameras, but it is not one I enjoy. This looks awful. After this though, Jason wakes up in Crystal Lake, Laurie pulls Freddy into the real world, and aside from an extremely poorly aged 30 seconds in which Freddy says some real racist shit to Kelly Rowlands, and she replies with a homophobic slur that's a very cringy and not good little time capsule into the early 2000s, everything otherwise from this point onwards is gold. It's just all fight. It's chaotic and bloody as hell and so silly and over the top. Ronnie Yu had previous experience directing in the wuxia genre with Bride with the White Hair and its sequels, and it shows here. These guys are flying around, just absolutely launching each other and any victims caught in the crossfire all over the shop. And it just builds and builds and builds. It starts in a fiery house and then before you know it, they're smashing gas canisters into each other, then they're chopping one another's limbs off at the dock. They go at it. This shit looks like a Nick Gage match put through a comic book filter. And while it might have taken a few rocky detours to get here with terrible characters, useless B-plots and some awful early 2000s CG, it's all worth it when you get to this bloody ridiculous brawl. I love it. Pure daft fun. Say what you like about the rest of the movie, and I get it, it ain't great, but come on. This makes it all a bit worth it, doesn't it? And it all ends on a big fun finishing blow as the two murder the hell out of one another. Jason seems to resurface with the machete, but a final fake out shows it to be Freddy, only for a final blow from Jason to come as a surprise in the form of stabbing Freddy with his own detached arm that's still equipped with his bladed glove, and giving a chance for final girl Laurie to deliver the killing swipe as she cuts off Freddy's head with Jason's machete, and Jason collapses back down into the depths from exhaustion. But don't worry, of course he isn't dead, and neither is Freddy, as a literal wink at the audience lets us know there's always the possibility of a round 2. That last half hour or so is so much fun. It might be a bit of a bumpy journey, but my god is the destination worth the wait. And yeah, it's still probably the safest avenue they could have went with this whole thing when compared to some of the more bonkers other options, but if this somewhat more risk-averse route is the one we had to take to get this supernatural smackdown, then so be it. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. Instant improvements could be made with the inclusion of a more likeable cast, more time focused on the main attraction rather than some uninteresting B-plot stuff, less use of wonky dated early 2000s CG. I mean, this scene with the stoner caterpillar it's fucking awful. But you know, for the most part, age CG aside, even when the two titans of terror aren't stabbing chunks out of each other, it's still pretty well put together. Sporting the biggest budget of either franchise outside of Nightmare's terrible reboot, it's able to give the two men some of the best production values they'll ever see. Again, CG aside, everything looks really great, and Ronnie Yu is a damn good director. Freddy's opening monologue is genuinely chilling at times, and a great mood setter to start the film off with a bang. Plus, that cornfield sequence, legitimately visually impressive and super well coordinated considering they've got a hulking dude on fire running around a dry cornfield full of extras. Ronnie literally wasn't a fan of either franchise when he got the job, but credit to the lad, he put the work in. Any failing that makes the movie bad is mostly at the script level. The film doesn't always work, sure, but I personally think his direction elevates some of the weaker material and makes the bits that do click pop big time. His eye for action and over-the-top style certainly adds a lot to that final confrontation. There's also a nice helping of fan service. I mean, besides the obvious fighting, that is. Laurie lives at 1428 Elm Street. We revisit the location of Western Hills Psychiatric Hospital, which was the setting of the third Nightmare movie. The plot point of Hypnosil comes up again, also from Nightmare 3. There's a nice little musical blend that mixes both characters' theme that plays at the beginning. It's got some fun kills, there's a cool montage of previous Nightmare movies. Obviously Jason gets to see his mom. Again, not Betsy Palmer, but still, the writers clearly know these characters and their stories. They've done their homework. I also like that they sort of went in the direction of making Jason the more sympathetic of the two. Like, Freddy's just a straight up monster in life and in death. But people have always been drawn to Jason for one reason or another as someone to root for a bit more despite his mass murderer status. And he did of course start as just an innocent child victim. I think the screenwriters were wise to acknowledge this element of empathy in the fandom and give some sort of force to gravitate towards outside of the crappy teens. It gives some stake to the final fight beyond just pick your fave. Like, I much prefer the Nightmare franchise to Friday the 13th, but narratively speaking, I was rooting for Jason. He's not a good guy, of course, but of these two, he's definitely the sympathetic hero if you had to give one of them that label. So yeah, it's flawed as hell. It's not a great film. And in a super bullshit move, the best line in the trailer where Laurie shouts, "Freddy versus Jason, place your bets," isn't even in the film. Bullshit. But, all that aside, I'd argue considering the development hell it went through, it actually has a decent little amount going for it, and this is probably the best Freddy vs. Jason we could maybe ever have gotten. In the end, I kinda think Stephen King put it best when he said about the film, "I'll be first in line. I mean, in my heart, I know it's gonna be terrible, but I'll still be there. Everyone who goes will be like me, forking over for the ticket while knowing that the very idea is ludicrous. A setup job only a studio accountant could love. And yet, maybe it'll be good. Even if it's not, remember what Vern Tessio said in Stand By Me about a Superman Mighty Mouse confrontation. No matter who wins, it'll be a good fight." And you know what, Stephen? It was a good fight. And with that, we have closed the book on both the 8th Nightmare on Elm Street and the 11th Friday the 13th, the final bow of the two biggest slasher icons of the 80s. After this, there's no more Robert Englund and no more attempt to follow the confusing Friday continuity. It's all reboots from here on out. the nightmare is over and Friday has fallen to dusk. But worry not, because there's still other iconic slashers on the horizon still to come. So make sure to like, comment and subscribe to my Only Dans at the red button below and hit the bell so you don't miss when we move on to the new kid on the block and tackle 1996's meta masterpiece, Scream. And don't forget, if you've enjoyed this show so far and would like to help support the channel, then you can become a patron at the Patreon link in the description below for access to exclusive features. But other than that, it's goodbye Freddy, goodbye Jason, hello Ghostface. As always, I've been Dan Drambles, you're watching Wholesome Halloween 2 Slasher Season, and I will see you again tomorrow.